Russian oil refineries are not fine. Ukrainian drones reach them. The next topic is Peace Summit. How close is the actual peace? Kursk operation update and Belarusian troops on the border, and ad nauseum Western fears of escalation. An expert United States Air Force veteran who served as a nuclear and missile operation officer comments. These topics in more detail in this very episode with me, Henry Keane, and my team of UATV English, bringing hot truth in easy terms for the whole free world directly from Ukraine. The roof is on fire. We don't need no water. Let the mother Russia burn, baby, burn. You can be like saying now, come on, Henry, where are your manners that are supposed to maketh man? Well, my manners are right where they are. They belong within me and this very wrap-up. I'm all out of manners right now, speaking that softly and eloquently, while I can hardly hold myself from an evil laugh and showing a middle finger, you know. Don't let yourself be fooled. Russian oil depots and refineries are on the fire that Vladimir Putin has ignited. What Ukraine did to this fire is only returned it to sender. An explosion and the fire broke out at Omsk oil refinery in Russia, owned by the Russian oil giant Gazprom. And it is not us, UATV English, saying that, it's Kremlin's Russian news agency Interfax, citing the refinery's press service. These press guys must be fired. Sorry, couldn't help that. This Gazprom Omsk refinery provided petroleum products not only for Russian criminal military aggression in Ukraine, but for the domestic Russian and Kazakhstan markets just as well. It has a production capacity of 21.6 million tons of crude oil and 1.2 million tons of gas annually. With a refining depth of 100% and the light oil product yield of over 80%, it was one of the largest refineries in Russia. For anti-anxiety reasons, I strongly recommend this calming, soothing footage released just recently with picturesque view of an oil depot ablaze in Russia's Kamensky district of Rostov region after 2 Ukrainian drones delivered their message. The incident came as oil tanks still blazed at another Rostov oil depot in the Proletarsk district that has been burning for at least a week in a row, and Russians just could not extinguish it. So, in easy terms, what's going on? Just some grammar of war, if you will. What was a war for Russia is slowly becoming the war for them. And we're only just getting started, Comrade Putin.
Let me be very clear on this one. Sweden adheres to international law. Ukraine has the right to defend itself inside and outside of the territory. And let's keep things into perspective. It's Russia who started an unprovoked full-scale aggression against Ukraine. So the Swedish position is that Ukraine has the right to defend itself inside and outside of Ukraine. And inside and outside of Ukraine. And we're going to be supporting Ukraine for as long as it takes.
So what one does when he can't win a war, he has started on his own. If the one is Putin, he tries to push away the accountability and raise fears of escalation. And all the army of professional cowards and the Kremlin's prepaid politicians start to whine in Europe and the West, oh, no more escalation, please, we want no more hostilities. We need to stop the war on any expense as long as it is Ukrainians want. Raped Ukrainian women, murdered Ukrainian children, annexed Ukrainian lands, genocide of Ukrainian nation. Look, here it is in easiest way possible for you. Tonight, unmanned and unnamed aerial vehicle hit Russian turf. Just Google it. Thermal power station in the Moscow region, thermal power station in Tver region, Moscow oil refinery, gas distribution networks, more thermal stations and power subs in Moscow region. The Moscow region is on fire. The Russians say they shot down more than 158 drones over 15 regions of Russia. Not yet confirmed whose drones were that, but with a certain probability, we can assume that these drones could have been Ukrainian drones, right? In this case, we hit the thermal stations and oil refineries of our enemy during a war which makes these locations a legit target. Being unable to defeat Ukrainians on the battlefield, losing turf in Kursk, having Moscow region burning, unable to defend no Russian land nor skies, here is how the Kremlin answers. This is Kharkiv this morning. Watch this and understand. Finally, all escalations in each and every war in the history of humanity were fought off with arms and never negotiated with paperwork. And this war is no different. When we hit Russian oil depot, it is no escalation but a legit military target. When Russians in return burn down children's hospital, that is an escalation. When we hit Moscow's thermal plant, it is no escalation but a legitimate payback. We have been living under their fire, burning our civilian infrastructure for almost 3 years. And when maddened Russian Tsar, in despair and anger, is killing Ukrainian children and civilians every single day, that is an escalation.
Russia fired rockets, about 10 strikes at several locations. It is currently known that 25 people were injured, including children, including 2 children who were seriously injured. In addition, 2 medical workers were wounded. 2 more adults are in serious condition. So far, there are no fatalities in all locations, but it is too early to draw final conclusions, as the consequence elimination is still ongoing. This is all civilian infrastructure. The location where we are is a shopping center that was crowded during the day. There were 2 strikes, which means the sports palace in Kharkiv. According to preliminary information, another 4 strikes were in other areas. There are also civilian injuries and hits in the open area, in the park zone.
Russia launched 789 Shahed kamikaze drones and missiles at Ukraine this August alone. Air raids continued for 27 out of 31 days. So here it is for you in easy terms. Kharkiv is a tragedy. But whoever says whatever, Russian oil refineries and other military objects will continue to burn on Russian turf until they decide to leave the Ukrainian land. This is exactly when the escalation stops. For the Second Peace Summit, a document should be prepared based on thematic conferences on the peace formula points, says President Zelensky. In easy terms, that means energy and nuclear safety, food security, and the release of all detained and deported Ukrainians. While the first thematic conference on energy has already taken place, the meetings on the other 2 topics are also scheduled. All 3 topics will be addressed and the full document will be developed in November, noted Zelensky. So the task for Ukraine is to develop the document as a preparatory step of stage for the Second Peace Summit.
У нас був інавгураційний саміт.
We held the inaugural peace summit. After that, we stated that we would prepare a document and hold meetings on the 3 main conclusions established by the first inaugural summit. All 3 points will be addressed and the complete document will be developed. I believe we will manage to finalize it in time for November. This is our task, to develop the document as a preparatory step or stage for the Second Peace Summit.
The venue for the Second Peace Summit has not yet been decided, but Ukraine expects that the event will take place in one of the countries of the Global South. Andrei Yermak, the head of the President's office, announced at Ukraine 2024. Independence Forum, but why all these talks about peace amidst the war? I mean, in what way do we in Ukraine benefit from this talks, and more talks again? Here it is in super easy terms. Ukraine benefits every time Russia doesn't. Putin spent billions of dollars to disrupt the first peace summit, and here we were, more than 100 countries and 60 international organizations altogether vocally confirmed peace in this Russia's instigated criminal war against Ukraine is what Ukraine calls peace, and no other version is legit. This is a huge benefit.
This high-level attendance shows one thing. The world cares deeply about the war provoked by Russia's aggression. The war blatantly violates international law and key principles of the UN Charter, and it has major negative impacts on countries across the globe, be it in food security, access to energy, or international trade. And time and again, speakers yesterday and today emphasized this impact on their economies. And so it is highly significant and valuable that so many parties came to Switzerland to discuss a way out of the war.
So as we can clearly see, Zelensky's peace formula is actually working, as every country can join a separate part of it to work at and to contribute to a global peace effort. And this is why Zelensky's peace formula is becoming increasingly popular. Not because it's Zelensky's formula, no, but because it is a peace one, as the world understands. Solely just and long-lasting peace is peace indeed, while a Russian version of peace is nothing but war, veiled by fears of escalation and excuses to murder more Ukrainians. Now on Kursk and Russia and fears of nuclear escalation, whatever that means, we decided to talk to United States Air Force veteran who served as a nuclear and missile operations officer. Interview on UATV. Our guest tonight is Jake Broe, United States Air Force veteran who served as a nuclear and missile operations officer. Hello, Mr. Broe.
Hello, thanks for having me, Henry.
Yeah, well, it's a pleasure. And I'm just craving to know, well, you know, Ukraine needs oil refineries in Russia. I've enjoyed the videos a lot, but in terms of efficiency, is that an efficient act of war for Ukrainian army? What do you say?
It was with the Allies during World War II. So going after a nation's strategic oil reserves, militaries run on oil. So I think this was a strategy that Ukraine devised last winter. They started aggressively striking oil depots and oil refineries in January, and we're not going to see the full results. We're not going to see the full benefits, I think, until this winter. So it's fascinating to see. The Kremlin is not releasing the data of how their oil industry is operating at the moment, but we're going to see the benefits or the results pretty darn soon.
Of course, the Kremlin is not releasing anything, but like Belarusian troops like crowding near the border with Ukraine. Do you know why?
I'm sure Putin got on the phone and yelled at Lukashenko and told him, move all your guys to the border. Lukashenko does not want to attack Ukraine. If he actually wanted to participate in this war, he would have done so 2.5 years ago. To any Belarusian citizen that wants to participate in Putin's special military operation to destroy Ukraine, they've had 2.5 years to sign a contract. I'm sure the Russian military would love to have them. So I'm convinced Lukashenko doesn't really actually want anything to do with this war anymore. When Putin sold it to him, it was supposed to be a 3-day special military operation. 2.5 years later, Lukashenko is just trying to stay alive. He doesn't want to be murdered by his own people like Gaddafi was. So no, I don't think Lukashenko is going to commit his military to attacking Ukraine. But as far as moving guys to the border, yeah, that costs him next to nothing, and he's happy to do Putin a favor just in that.
Kind of showing off, you know, just and trying to stay alive. That makes sense. Thank you so very much. I take that as an answer. But events in the Kursk region of Ukraine, Russia. Can you please comment on the strategic importance of such events in regards to Ukraine's partners? So do you think of that Kursk operation? What do you think? Are you encouraged?
Yes, there's several aspects here. We can just take at face value what Zelensky says the objective was: to create a buffer zone on the Russian side of the border to protect Ukrainian villages. If they can create a 20 to 30 kilometer buffer inside of Russia, Russia can no longer use artillery to strike Ukrainian towns. So if that was the only benefit, that's still a pretty good benefit. But there are numerous others. The first one that I think Zelensky is very concerned with is the politics. Ukraine has to show some tangible benefit in order for their supporters and allies around the world to lobby their governments for additional military aid. When you can show results on the battlefield, you can then make arguments in parliament or in Congress or in the capitals. Let's keep giving Ukraine military aid. They will get results. When we give Ukraine the weapons they need, they can defeat the Russians. The third aspect is just dispelling the myth about the nuclear threats. What are Russia's red lines? And at the moment, there are the armed forces of Ukraine occupying the sovereign territory of Russia, the internationally recognized territory of Russia.
Right.
And nobody is talking about nuclear weapons anymore. For 2.5 years, it's been scare tactics. If you provide Leopards, if you provide Patriots, if you provide F-16s,
Right.
we're going to nuke you. And there are no red lines. I've made this argument consistently the last 2 years on my channel that there's no benefit for Russia to use a nuclear weapon anywhere in the world. The blowback and negative consequences would exceed any tangible benefits on the battlefield. So Russia is not going to use a nuclear weapon. There are no red lines. All restrictions should be lifted, and Ukraine should be allowed to win this war.
What a lovely answer. Well, let me first quote NBC News for you. Faced with ignominy of losing his own territory to the neighbor he had invaded, the assumption seemed Putin would scramble the Kremlin's might to drive out the Ukrainians, even if it meant sacrificing progress elsewhere. End of quote. That has not been the case, obviously. Why do you think?
It is fascinating watching these clips on Kremlin State TV. They're already changing the narrative that Ukrainians sometimes occupying Russian territory is the new normal.
Right.
As part of Putin's special military operation, sometimes Russia just loses their own sovereign territory. The new narrative is it's not a big deal. Nothing to worry about. Russia is massive. Russia is big. People in Russia won't even notice that part of Kursk is now gone. That's insane to me, but that's the reality that a dictator can spin. When a dictator controls the narrative, when he controls all media, reality is just whatever he wants it to be. So Putin knows that these Ukrainian forces in Kursk are not going to be expelled anytime soon. I think Ukraine's going to hold on to this territory until the war is finally over and there's some kind of negotiation to give it back. But Putin doesn't care. He's concerned about other fronts. His military at the moment is focused on Donetsk. They're focusing on Pokrovsk. I think that Russia is trying to take as much territory as they can inside of Ukraine prior to this ceasefire that they're seeking. They believe that perhaps after the November election here in the United States, they can sit at the negotiating table and get even more territory from concessions. Putin's done very well negotiating with weak Western leaders the last 24 years. So the guy in some ways is an optimist that he can trick and fool and bully the Western partners into just giving him what he wants. I don't think that's going to happen anymore. I think he's gone too far. I think the West is not going to tolerate this anymore. But he's going to keep pretending like everything's okay because he views that as his best path forward.
Right. Well, you say West is not going to tolerate that anymore, but you know what? I hate this term, escalation, with this talks of escalation. These professional political cowards using these terms or abusing this term, just to not want to face the fact. It seems to me that every escalation in every war in human history was stopped by force, with arms in your hand, not paperwork or not calls to negotiation, because dictators do not negotiate. Is that right? They just take lands and ex-lands, or they are defeated. So if the West is not afraid and is not going to tolerate anything, then why Putin is not defeated yet? Where are the weapons? I mean, enough weapons and fast enough weapons coming, of course, but like snail slow. Why is that, you think?
We say the West, but we can be honest, the West is not unified. If
True.
You're one of Russia's neighbors, the Baltics, Poland, Finland, you have a different opinion than maybe people in Berlin or Paris or Washington, D.C. I'm convinced that the ultimate goal of my government, the United States, is to prevent nuclear war at all costs. We don't want to see Russia dissolve, Russia break up, and then have regional warlords fighting over oil and gas fields and gold mines with nuclear weapons. So in some ways, I do think at the highest levels of power in our governments, they're trying to protect Putin. They're trying to keep Putin alive and in charge of Russia to prevent Russia from collapsing, because in that nightmare scenario, many people would die. If Russia as a state fell apart and then broke up into civil war, and nuclear weapons are being possessed and used by all these regional powers. But my argument is we can't prevent that. We can't say to Putin, all right, we'll give you whatever you want, like we've been doing the last 2 decades. But please don't leave office. Please don't allow Russia to collapse. There's a broader historical narrative here in that when the old colonial powers broke up and decolonized, Russia skated by. Russia's hold on the Caucasus and Central Asia and Siberia, that shouldn't be Russian territory. It should have been decolonized. The Russian Empire during the 1700s, 1800s, early 1900s took all this territory by force, subjugated all these people, and they were never given their freedom. They were never given their autonomy back. We don't have good answers here. Nobody knows what's going to happen 6 months from now, but we're going to find out together. And my argument is Putin didn't give us a choice. We're not just going to give Putin whatever he wants to prevent bad things from happening.
Absolutely.
Because bad things are happening right now to Ukraine.
No, absolutely. I agree with that. But, my argument in terms of if we don't want to see Russia falling apart because there's going to be a big war and a lot of people are going to die, I can't agree to that because USSR fell apart at some point and there was no nuclear war and not much people died, actually. There was not a war right now going on in battlefields and in the skies with Ukraine or with any other country, but still USSR was way bigger and way more looking like an empire than Russia is. Russia is trying to look like, but not. But anyway, we don't want a big war in Europe, but I think that there's going to be a big war in Europe if we are not going to stay together and stop Putin. Do you think that we maybe have to have more weapons and faster weapons? How do you think we can convince West to deliver more, like air defense for Ukraine? Because you have to see what's going on right now. Hundreds of missiles and drones recently onto Ukraine, and Putin is just taking his oil bath and waving his nuclear gavel. Is West afraid, Mr. Broe, do you think?
Ordinary citizens living in the West have to continue pressure on their government. And unfortunately, we've seen what pressure on our governments can do. When Western capitals were saying no to Leopard tanks, when they were saying no to F-16s, when they were saying no to the use of ATACMS, people kept the pressure on their governments to say, change that position. That's not a real red line. So as far as more military aid, I'm an American. I can only speak for the United States, but we're going to have another political debate this November, December, or January about an additional year's worth of funding, another $60 billion. And ordinary Americans who support Ukraine, you got to call and write your representatives. You got to apply pressure.
True.
That's just the democratic process, how anything gets done. Concerning the bigger picture, to the first part of your question, we need to have a new way of thinking about trade and relations with authoritarian regimes. The fact that countries like Iran, North Korea, Syria, Russia are all militarily cooperating. If you want to lump in the Chinese are not looking very friendly towards their neighbor Taiwan. But this is a new discussion we have to have. The belief that if we just have good trade relations and good diplomatic relations with authoritarian regimes, then we can live in peace with them. And that's not what's happened. Okay. Putin has dispelled that myth. If we do business with dictators, if we make them rich, if we give them our technology and we buy their oil at inflated prices, what are they going to do with that money? We assumed that making these authoritarian regimes wealthy would liberalize them. A middle class would bloom and a Russian middle class would demand human rights and representative democracy. It's not happening.
No.
China, Russia, they just take our money, they corrupt us, they make our democracies weaker, and then they just build up their military force. They're never going to stop. that more people will die if we continue business as normal with these authoritarian regimes.
All I can say is thank you so very much for this lovely interview and for your time and for your obvious expertise. I hope to talk to you very soon, and I have a whole bunch of questions for you, and I just don't have enough time for the moment. But thank you so very much.
Thank you, Henry.
Thank you. Goodbye. It was Jake Broe answering all the questions, and brilliantly answering, if you ask me, United States Air Force veteran who served as a nuclear and missile operations officer. Thank you, and stay tuned for UATV English. Well, it looks like that was it for tonight and for the week, actually. So thank you so very much for being with us. Please like, please share, and please comment. Your voice matters, as it in turn helps Ukrainian voice to be heard worldwide. So more to come next week with my colleagues on UATV English, or maybe me, bringing you hard truth in easy terms, as usually directly from Ukraine. Stay tuned for more, and goodbye.